Welcome back to a new episode of Podcast on the Brink. Thursday morning, August 22nd. Battle for Atlantis bracket was announced on Wednesday morning, and maybe not surprisingly, the event organizers chose to pair up some regional rivals, Indiana and Louisville, in the first game there. They'll play Wednesday afternoon before Thanksgiving at noon, so make sure you take off work that day if you want to see the game. But to help us just kind of learn a little bit about this Louisville team, which is completely different from the team that Indiana saw last season up in New York, Eric Crawford of WDRB is back on Podcast on the Brink. How you doing today, Eric?
Doing good, Alex. Doing good. And we'll try and learn about them. I mean, at least we got those two games that they've already played in the Bahamas to go by. Otherwise, we wouldn't know anything about them.
Right. So I've done a little bit of research on this team, and obviously there's only so much you can do in terms of projecting a team when it's a completely new roster. But for those maybe unfamiliar with kind of what happened at Louisville in the offseason, Kenny Payne was dismissed and they brought in Pat Kelsey, but it's not often that you see a roster completely turned over. What was kind of the impetus but behind Kelsey is kind of starting completely from scratch and going with a completely new roster at Louisville?
Yeah, I don't know, if he wanted to keep anybody. There might have been guys that he wanted to keep. There were still a handful of players left on this roster when he was hired. Of course, Kenny Payne was let go after his really disastrous 2-year run. That's all we can probably say about it. But Kelsey came in, and he's a different kind of guy. I mean, Kenny Payne, there's not many more laid-back seeming individuals than him. And Pat Kelsey's the opposite. I mean, he's hyper. Skip Prosser, who was one of his old mentors, said he makes coffee nervous. And he brought in this high-energy situation, and they showed his first talk to the existing Louisville team, which was just a handful of guys at that point. And you could even see in that video, some guys are like, I'm not going to sit here for this. This guy's is like watching kids when they first got to camp, listening to the camp counselor being all hyper and all that. And some buy in and some don't. But and not many, it didn't seem like, bought in. And I don't think he had too big a problem with that. So it was a complete roster makeover. They brought one guy back. He was a walk-on. So it is a completely new team. A couple of the guys that Kelsey brought in are redshirting and not playing, but what he did wind up bringing in was a lot of experience. He brought in 10 guys who played in last year's NCAA tournament. He brought in a lot of scoring. They've got maybe 5-6 guys who've played 2,000 Division I minutes. A lot of shooting, pretty good size, not a lot of bulk. But an interesting group that we knew nothing about until they went to the Bahamas in July, and we saw some impressive things from them, albeit against competition we can't really gauge. So it's going to be an interesting group to cover. But I would be, it's fair to say that the estimate of this team has raised pretty significantly since it showed what it showed in the Bahamas.
So from an Indiana perspective, I'm not sure how familiar you are with their non-conference schedule, but they've put a lot of eggs in the Battle for Atlantis basket. They've scheduled, I think, 8 home games outside of this. The only high major team they're going to play is South Carolina at home, which we don't know. South Carolina was an NCAA tournament team this year, and I don't think the expectation is for them to be as good this year with what they lost in the offseason. So this is really an important game on the non-conference schedule for Indiana, because if they can win this game, they obviously would set themselves up to get a chance at Gonzaga and potentially Arizona. If they lose this game, all of a sudden you're looking at a scenario where maybe you don't even play an NCAA tournament team in the non-conference, which is not something you want to do when you're looking to build a resume. So from a Louisville perspective, how important is this event in terms of how it fits into their non-conference schedule? What else kind of are they going to do in the non-conference, and how important, I guess, is this game and this event for them?
Well, Louisville will have played Louisville's second game of the season. Second real game of the season is against Tennessee. Actually, they played a little tournament before that, so they'll have a couple games under their belt. But So they will have played. I don't know what, we know Tennessee was good last year. I'm not sure. Again, it's kind of like South Carolina. I'm not sure how good they're supposed to be, but that's a decent test for them at home. But Louisville has other non-conference tests. I mean, and in fact, probably more than they would like to have, given what they have coming off of that. They will play Ole Miss. They play Kentucky every year, so they've got that. So they've got a few games, not a lot. This is also going to be a pretty important stretch for them. But I would, from the standpoint of where Louisville's been and where it's coming from, there's not a ton of pressure on this team, I would think. I mean, people are going to be happy if they can just hold their own in some of these games. But again, from what I've said, from what we've seen, if Indiana can win the game, it stands a chance to be a quality win at the end of the season. It certainly opens the door for Indiana to get better opponents over the next couple of days down there in the Bahamas.
Looking at this roster, you mentioned Kelsey really focused on targeting guys in the transfer portal that have won and that are old. I mean, you look at kind of the ages of some of these players. I don't think they're really going to have all that many players returning from this roster the next season. So it's going to kind of be another rebuild after year one. But it also seems like he's put this together with the mindset of we're going to go try to make the tournament in year one. We're not going to try to waste any time and, get this thing back on the upswing. And the Athletic has already picked Louisville to finish third in the ACC, which would be quite a turnaround coming from a 3-17 season. But when you look at this roster and who they brought in, who are in your mind some of the key cogs in terms of who's going to maybe be the go-to scorer? We obviously know the name Chucky Hepburn from an Indiana perspective because he's been on those Wisconsin teams that always give Indiana a ton of problems. So he'll be familiar playing against Indiana. But who are some of these other names to know from the Louisville roster?
Well, there is a guy that did a lot of scoring down the Bahamas in their first trip was Corin Johnson, just a guy who can has a nose for the basket and can score points. But you've got guys who can score. Noah Waterman came in from BYU as a big kid who can shoot, 6'11" kid who can shoot. Should be a pretty good player for them. You mentioned Chucky Hepburn. I would throw out there a guy like Terrence Edwards Jr. who came from James Madison. He was a Sun Belt Player of the Year last year. He didn't have a great offensive tournament down in the Bahamas, but they put a lot of points up and they shot the ball really well. One of the things in the Athletic article that you mentioned was just three-point shooting. They return about 1,000 more made three-pointers than any other team in the ACC, and they shot and made a bunch. I think they had 18, averaged 18 in games down there against token defense, I think we have to say, in watching it. But there were times last year where Louisville did make 18 threes in the warm-ups. So fans are excited when they watch that kind of thing. Other guys to watch is Javon Hadley. He was a good scorer down there. He's a 6'6" swing man. They have decent size. And Rain Smith, who played for Pat Kelsey at Charleston, didn't have a good shooting tournament, but is what he expects to be the best three-point shooter on the team. Kason Pryor is 6'10". Again, Louisville's got a lot of these 6'10" guys who can shoot and get out on the court. They don't have a lot of bulk. They don't have anybody that's going to be a question in a game against Indiana, is who can stop some of the interior game that Indiana's going to have going on. But they have good size. Kenai Boost is a freshman, and he was a 4 or 5 star freshman coming in, and he played extremely well down the Bahamas, which I think was something they weren't looking for. Kelsey brought a 6'10" guy with him from Charleston who he expects is going to play a good bit and is a pretty good player. So they just have a lot of guys. There's no one guy right now that you can say here's their go-to guy, here's their end of the shot clock guy. They don't have that, and maybe that'll be a problem for them. I don't know, but they got a lot of guys who scored a lot of points. And one thing that we saw from the Bahamas is that they don't mind passing the basketball. They had 27 assists in their first game down there, so they don't mind to move the ball around and look for each other. And if they keep that up, they're going to be a tough team for people to play.
With the foreign tour, it seems to me a lot of cases that the real value is the 10 practices rather than the 2 games. Is that kind of the sense that you got
Yeah.
from watching them, and what Kelsey was able to maybe do with those 10 practices could give them a head start, particularly in a year where you're trying to get your new system in, you're trying to integrate all these guys. It's great to go play 2 games, but to have those 10 practices, he's maybe got to feel already for a little bit for what he's got in terms of his roster and how he wants to play and how he wants to divvy up the minutes.
Yeah, I think so. I don't know if they know they want to divvy up the minutes, but they certainly got a chance to do some install and a lot of it. And that's the big reason. This tour kind of came out of nowhere. I mean, it like materialized, it felt like in a month. And it kind of is an indicator of what's riding on this season for Louisville. They've had such bad years. I mean, we were talking about, you're talking about a program that averaged, 17,000 a game, even in its down years. And now this past couple of years, they were down to nothing last year. They were down to 4,000 people in that arena. There's a lot riding on this team winning this season. I think that was kind of the impetus for trying to give them every chance they could give them to put a team together, get some chemistry going, and try and get them in a situation where they can compete right away quickly. Kenny Payne lost his first exhibition game at Louisville. That can't happen again. This is a program that relies on basketball for revenue. Their football team is doing well, and it does what it does, but they've got to have basketball revenue. They may not ever make money the way they did when Pitino was here, but they've got to win games and make revenue in the current college sports landscape. So it's more than just wanting to get back to winning. They need to get back to winning.
Have they done anything in terms of outreach to the fan base, try to get people back down at the Center this season, or is it just do they expect that the change and the excitement for something new will naturally draw some people back on its own?
No, there's been a lot of fan base. Kelsey recently did just a season ticket holder only sit down talk in the arena with fans. Media wasn't invited to that. I know
of course.
Well, we got to go to one when Kenny Payne was here, but there wasn't one for that, and so we didn't get to kind of hear. We heard some social media snippets that came out of that, but that was it. But that's the kind of thing they've done. He's been out in the community. He's got a couple of higher profile events coming up this month. Has a Q&A at a museum here in town. He and Mark Pope are doing a joint event for a group called Leadership Louisville late this month, and they're going to appear on the stage together to talk about their programs. That's not something that's happened very often here. So that'll be interesting. And they've done a lot. He's sent a personal letter to season ticket holders, and they're reaching out that way and doing a lot of that kind of thing. And I would say he is, certainly you compare him to Kenny Payne, he's a lot more active on social media. He's a lot more out there. He's done he came in his first week, he was doing Twitter spaces with a local radio host. And that doesn't happen a lot with certainly our head coaches here. So he's done a lot of different kinds of things. And then just in the whole NIL landscape, the collective at Louisville started its own media branch. Just in this off season, they were the people that broadcast Louisville's games from the Bahamas. So you've got players on this team. Cason Pryor has a podcast. You've got guys doing their own type of features. So they're coming for our jobs, Alex. I'm afraid they're going to get them.
Yeah. What happened with the NIL piece? Because it seemed like there wasn't a ton of buzz there the last couple of years under Kenny Payne from the NIL perspective. And I think I saw something, might have been CBS this week, where they mentioned some of the programs with have the best NIL support in college basketball. I know Indiana was on there. I'm pretty sure I saw Louisville on there. What happened? Was that something that the athletic department kind of realized that they needed to step up, and that was part of the commitment that they made when they brought Kelsey in? And how did that all kind of change seemingly in one off season?
Yeah, it's interesting here, and I saw that thing that you saw from CBS. I think Kentucky was 4, Indiana was 5, and maybe Louisville tied for 6 or 7 or something like that. So they were right there, kind of lumped together. Louisville's always had a pretty good collective setup. They were a little bit late starting, but it's founded by a guy named Josh Spiegel, who's got 2 degrees from Louisville, and sold his company, sold his waste management. company in Atlanta. He now lives in Atlanta for more than $2 billion. So he's got some money behind him. It's not all coming from him, but he got the ball rolling on this collective, and they've done well. They raised a ton of money. Like in the week after Pat Kelsey was hired, they had a matching deal where if they raised $1 million, Rick Heber, who is a Planet Fitness, I think the largest franchisee owner in the Planet Fitness chain, pledged to match it. So he matched $1 million gift. He gives a lot of money anyway through that. There are little, this, Indiana's different, Kentucky's different, Louisville's different. They have individuals who want to see basketball win. Most places, this is a football matter. You're gonna, you can get people to give for football. Basketball might be secondary or an afterthought. That's not the case at Louisville, as it is, and 8 or 10 other programs probably in the nation where basketball you can get people to give to first. So they have people who are motivated and who give. The thing was that under Kenny Payne, he had his own people, and while they used collective money and the collective, gave. I think Kenny Payne, from everything I've heard, left money on the table that the collective was willing to give, and he just didn't avail himself of that for whatever reason. So that when Kelsey came, it's a far more integrated deal where the collective and the coaches, and they're all on the same page. So at some point during this past season, off season, the university endorsed the collective, which enables them to do a few more things. They were able to advertise in games here and have a lot more integrated approach to what they're doing. So that's been good. It's been good for the collective and good all around. And money, Louisville's not going to have as much money, maybe as some, but it's going to have more than most. And I think that showed in some of the ways he was able to recruit, even some of the guys he didn't get. And, I think there's a case of a kid in IU's roster I don't think probably would have fit as well here as he does in Indiana. But, they were there. It seemed like they were in on everybody for a while, whether it was real or not. They were immediately contacting everybody that kind of popped onto the portal who was of any quality.
I think my biggest question with Louisville going into next season is just how good of a coach is Pat Kelsey? He's obviously made the NCAA tournament at places that aren't traditional powers in college basketball. I correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think he's won an NCAA tournament game, which I think the same is true for Mark Pope at Kentucky. So you're talking about two of the, historically top 10 programs in college basketball hiring coaches that with not a lot of tournament success. But specifically to Kelsey, what have you learned maybe about how he wants to play, and what is the upside now that he's at Louisville? Is the expectation that he's going to be able to take this thing to contend every year in the ACC? Or are they just looking to get back to at least being relevant in the ACC?
Well, it's hard to even know what a good coach is anymore because the game has changed so much. But what Kelsey appears to be is a guy, he's committed to this motion, kind of 4 out, 5 out offense, 3 points, 2 point, 3-pointers and layups. That's what they want to shoot. And that's what the shot chart did reflect when in their first couple of exhibition games anyway. Defensively, I think there was a big question. The Chris Mack brought this pack line structure here. And I think Kelsey is, he comes from the same line. He was an associate head coach under Chris Mack at Xavier. They turned up and were able, I think they play a little more pressure defense, or try to, than say a typical pack line. They try and generate some turnovers and turn defense and offense a little more than some of those traditional teams. But you're right. I mean, that's the big question is he brought, basically the staff he brought was the staff he had at Charleston. And, they're comfortable with him. He's comfortable with them. But how's that translate? And that's one of the biggest questions about this team. It's interesting that they're paying him $2.3 million a year, which is significantly less than Kenny Payne made. It's about a third of what Rick Pitino made. It's half, at least, less than half probably what Chris Mack was making. So it's a different type of situation where you're bringing a guy in who's got to prove himself. And I know he's been to the tournament a couple times, but this is a different animal, and I think he knows that. And we just have to. The only way to learn that answer is to watch and to see what happens in game and to see how he operates. And we've not seen any of that yet under any kind of real fire. So that's going to be that's one of the big questions that remains to be answered. And frankly, this game against Indiana will be one of the first times we get a real glimpse of how that's going to work.
The last thing, I mean, you obviously are in the area. You've been aware of what has happened last season with Indiana not performing up to expectations, really kind of hit a home run in the portal, I guess, so to speak, on paper with what they brought in and their expectations are. I think what my dad, Rick Bozich, wrote earlier this week, I mean, this is kind of spot on. This is a game that Indiana really needs to win. And I think Louisville kind of goes in with no pressure. And if they can win this game, it would be a big deal for them. But I mean, what do you think with Indiana this year? I mean, is it kind of a prove it year in your eyes for Woodson, just in terms of now he's got maybe his roster of the guys he wanted to have, and at least on paper, to me, it looks like one of the more talented groups in the Big Ten. Should be no reason that they couldn't at least in a year with Zach Edey now gone from the Big Ten and with what they have, at least contend to maybe win the Big Ten title.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. When you look at this roster on paper, when you look at Ballo, who they brought in from Arizona, he's a kid that visited Louisville, or was scheduled to and didn't. And again, he's more of a traditional center. He's 6'10" and 240 and is a big body and a really good player. I think he's going to be a matchup issue for Louisville. It's going to be kind of a battle of who gets the game they want to get. How are they able to play and that kind of thing. But, him, Renault, that you got a new backcourt. The thing about these programs, and Louisville's fallen off the map. So that's one thing here. But Indiana hasn't done that. But in some ways in Bloomington, if you're not competing in the NCAA tournament and getting to Sweet 16s and giving people that hope, you're in the second weekend of the tournament, you have that hope of getting further once in a while. If you're not doing that, you might as well be off the map. I mean, fans, that's the standard for them, and it has been, and they haven't been able to get that. And you're only going to get so much time, favorite son or not, to make that happen. So this is a make or break year for Mike Woodson, and I think you've seen some of that strain show in some of the stuff that's going on, and the entities and whatever media, however this works. But it's time to produce, and he's had time, and he's had really good players. There've been some missing pieces, but this group, when you look at it, do they have enough shooting? Well, they should. They certainly have the inside presence. So this is a big year, I think, for Mike Woodson.
Well, Eric, thanks for taking the time. I know you're in the middle of covering fall camp for football at Louisville, which obviously they're expecting a big season there once again. And thanks for taking some time to take a break from that and talk some hoops here in August.
All right. Thanks, Alex. Anytime.
Thanks, everybody, as always, for listening to Podcast on the Brink. If you enjoy the show, please leave us a rating or a review on Apple Podcasts. Leave us a 5-star rating on Spotify, and we'll be back soon with another episode of Podcast on the Brink.